100 subscribers. Whether if this is your first video or your 50th, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I know it's cliche, but we couldn't get here without you. So I wanted to thank you because we started this channel a few months back. And to get to this point this quickly, I really can't thank you guys enough. But coming at you hot and heavy on today's episode, Mock Draft 2.0. Let's get it. Number one overall is Fernando Mendoza. It's the boring, but it's the right pick, and it's going to be intriguing to see if he starts from day number one. I know historically, number one overall picks usually always start that early. However, with Brady and how much he's talked about developing these young guys before throwing them into the fire, I guess that's the biggest thing to watch out for with how the Raiders deal with this number one overall pick. But at number two, we have the New York Jets, and this is where the draft starts. There's been some buzz around David Bailey at this point. Heck, maybe even trading out of this spot. But I do think they add a defensive player. I think that goes without saying. And to me, I think you look at the combination of upside, but also day one readiness. And I think that does lean towards David Bailey. However, I think Aaron Glenn, he's going to want a true chess piece from day number one. And that's going to be a guy like Arvell Reese, a guy you can use in a multitude of ways. He can fly around the field, generate some turnovers, which you had very few of last season. So I do think Arvell Reese at number two makes a lot of sense for a defensive-minded coach to get a defensive master chess piece. At number three is the Arizona Cardinals, and originally in my first mock draft, I had them going tackle. But that was before Kyler Murray was released, and now he's in Minnesota. So now it's clearly a rebuild year for Arizona. They're going to go after the Arch Mannings, the John Mateers, the Josh Hoovers, the top-end quarterbacks of next year's class, Dante Moore as well. So we got to start building a roster around that position so they can actually compete and be relevant from day number one. I think taking the best player available makes a lot of sense. In my eyes, that's David Bailey. He would join a defensive line with Josh Sweat, who had 12.5 sacks last year, as well as my favorite player from last year's class in general, in Walter Nolen. So all of a sudden, David Bailey's coming in. Had 14.5 sacks last year at Texas Tech. Josh Sweat, 12.5. Walter Nolen, that defensive front there in the NFC West could be interesting. We'll just have to see how bad exactly they're going to be offensively next year and where they can land in the 2027 draft. And number four is the Tennessee Titans, and I think this is the biggest wild card spot of this entire first round, especially in the top half, because we really don't know where they're going to go. They added John Franklin Myers this offseason. They hired Robert Saleh and as well as Brian Daboll. So they can go in a multitude of directions as far as where they would like to go. But when you have Cam Ward, the objective is simple. Let's make his job as easy as humanly possible. And I think the easiest way to do that without a true number one wide receiver is to get a generational running back. Jeremiah Love, I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm going to have him at number four to the Tennessee Titans. A guy that has underrated receiving ability to his game, but can also be the bell cow of this offense from day number one. You can spell him with Tajay Spears, with Tony Pollard, give this offense really a lot of different looks for defenses that they will face this year. But I think you can get other edge rushers down the board. Maybe at the top end of the second round, you get a corner, or you get an edge rusher like a Gabe Akis, someone I'm really high on. That could be the best route. But there's no doubt, I would like to see the Titans add another wide receiver at some point in this draft. And number five is the New York Giants. Look, they have a dominant defensive front. I think the linebackers need some work. And with that, obviously, pointing towards Sonny Styles, this is a great pick. John Harbaugh gets this wild card athletic freak in the middle of his defense, the guy that has the number one combine of any linebacker in NFL history, according to Relative Athletic Score. Look, he flew around the field for Ohio State last year. Incredibly smart. He's going to be the green dot play-calling linebacker of this defense from day number one. They've added some secondary pieces. And again, I think Sonny Styles is that finishing touch on a John Harbaugh defense that can make some noise in a wide-open division next season. And number six, let's clarify. This is not what I would do mock draft. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I think the team will do. With the additions of Zion Johnson, Elton Jenkins, of course with Titus Howard being acquired via trade, it is clear to me that we are going to go after a left tackle. Now, Francis Mauigoa is probably my top tackle on the board at this point in the draft. However, he's more of a right tackle, and I don't know if Todd Monken's going to want to develop him as a left tackle. So from what I'm hearing around Browns beat writers and my hometown team, I think Monroe Freeling, a guy that has flew up draft boards in recent weeks, he reminds me of Armand Membu in the sense of a guy that really came out of nowhere after the combine, and he flew up into the top 10 of the draft. This year, it's Monroe Freeling, and I wouldn't do this as a Browns fan. If you're asking me, what would you do? I would get a receiver at number 6, whoever they would like best, one of the top 3 guys. And then at pick 24, that's when I would grab my tackle or offensive lineman there for the future. But regardless, at number 6, I do think Todd Monken wants to set the tone of this offense, protect whatever quarterback is going to be taking the snaps, and Monroe Freeling gives us a blindside tackle for the future. And number 7 is the Washington Commanders. And when they're sitting here, they have a couple different options. But I think ultimately, with Sonny Styles off the board, it comes down to Ruben Bain, and it comes down to Caleb Downs. You added 2 edge rushers this offseason already, and I think that's going to open the door for a Caleb Downs selection. I'm not worried, and I'm not buying into this narrative of these injury concerns around Caleb Downs. And so what? If he needs a couple weeks to get really fully ready for the NFL, so be it. I think this Commanders defense with Caleb Downs will be night and day better going into next season. And like I've already mentioned with the Giants, I think this division is wide open next season, especially with a returning Jaden Daniels to this Washington team. So again, they got to add some offensive pieces down the board. But as far as the defense is concerned, Dan Quinn gets a lot of help going into 2026. For the Saints, at number 8, they need a receiver. I think offensive pieces in general, right? They did trade, or not trade, but added Travis Etienne this offseason. They brought in a guard, of course, there, I believe, David Andrews. So it's clear to me they're going to go with an outside threat. If you're asking me personally, I would take the shot on Jordan Tyson. I think he's an athletic freak and could be the best receiver in the class. However, when you look at the guy that is the cleanest wide receiver as far as the combination of production as well as upside, I think the obvious answer is Carnell Tate. A big body wide receiver joins an offense with already Chris Olave, Etienne, Alvin Kamara, Tyler Shough, Jawan Johnson as well. Tyler Shuck's going to have so many receiving options around him. I don't think he's going to know what to do. But Kellen Moore, Tyler Shough, getting another Ohio State wide receiver, and this offense could explode going into next season. At number 9, it was a bit of a fall from grace for the longtime dominant AFC frontrunner Kansas City Chiefs. But this is a blessing in disguise because now you get to add an incredible talent to a team with Patrick Mahomes, and you're going into next year maybe with not the heightened expectations of years prior. For them at number 9, you have a lot of different options. But personally, with that additional second or first round pick down the board in which you acquired from Trent McDuffie trade, I think you can get a edge rusher down the board. And with that in mind, you're going to pass on Ruben Bain. You're going to get who you believe is the best cornerback in the class. And to me, that is Mansour Delane. So you get a long physical corner, a guy that can guard the Ladd McConkeys, the Quentin Johnstons of the world, the Cortland Suttons of the world. I should have started with him. Regardless, Mansour Delane is your Trent McDuffie replacement. And fun fact for you, the last time the Chiefs drafted a cornerback in the first round, obviously it was Trent McDuffie. So they get his replacement here at number 9. We will address the other needs down the board. Now, at number 10, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think they are going to have this card in before that timer even starts because Ruben Bain somehow, someway is still on the board. And I think the Bengals would run, again, to get this pick in. He is your Trey Hendrickson replacement. You brought in an edge rusher in Boye Mafe. This could be his running mate there in Ruben Bain. And again, you lost a short arm edge rusher there in Trey Hendrickson. You replaced him with Ruben Bain. Again, a guy that was so physically dominant. I think you look past those physical measurements that could come as a concern. And number 11 is the Miami Dolphins, who, as of an hour ago, traded away Jalen Waddle to the Denver Broncos, and they acquired a ton of picks in return, most notably a late first-round pick. So they have 2 first-round picks to play with, and I've put no thought into who that second first-round pick could be. So we're going to get to that when we get to that. But as of right now at pick 11, the top corner is off the board. So a lot of the top edge rushers and wide receivers could be off the board. So I think with Malik Willis coming in, we need to protect him. To get a franchise tackle potentially at number 11, it's too good to pass up on. And with a defensive-minded head coach, he knows that the game is won and lost in the trenches. Francis Mauigoa makes a lot of sense to the Miami at number 11. I think they're going to want to run the football a lot more going forward. And number 12 is the Dallas Cowboys, who sneakily, I think, have had a very good offseason. They've changed their defense and how it's going to operate as far as their base set. But I still think they need secondary help. And though the top corner is off the board, I think Jermon McCoy makes a lot of sense. He is a long physical corner. Yes, he had a bad combine, but he can guard the A.J. Browns of the world, the Terry McLaurins, Devontae Smiths. You get the picture. Malik Neighbors when he comes back from injury. This is your ace corner. This is your island corner who you're going to trust to really give your defensive front a bit of an edge in the pass game there, especially in that division. At 13, we have the LA Rams, who, again, they have a complete roster, and they added to it, trading away a boatload of picks for Trent McDuffie to really make a playoff push. Now, I want to throw this idea out there for you guys. And look, Sean McVay is my favorite coach of all time. Him or Sean Payton, right? I grew up a Saints fan, and not a Saints fan, but a Drew Brees fan, as you could see with the sign ball behind me. With Sean McVay, he has contemplated retirement really since his last Super Bowl run. And there's murmurs every single offseason about it. I truly believe that when Matt Stafford is done, Sean McVay may take a year or two break. That might entail retiring from the NFL. And if that is the case, you got to go all in. If this is the last year for Stafford and or McVay, if they can win it all, again, you have to shoot for the fences. And that could mean drafting a Jordan Tyson at pick 13, the best receiver in the class. Yes, he has health concerns, but if you can get him next to Devontae Adams, next to Puka Nacua, my goodness, that could be scary for an offense that was so great to be even better. I don't know who's guarding that. However, I'm going to make the right decision, and that is going to be Spencer Fanu. He has a lot of versatility, can play 4 spots on the offensive line there for the LA Rams. And whether McVay and Matt Stafford are there for the long term or not, this is a guy that could stick around for the next decade. So for the Rams fans, I'm doing you a favor with that selection there. But don't be shocked if they just go balls to the wall and draft Jordan Tyson at pick 13. Now at 14 is the now newly coached Jesse Minter-led Baltimore Ravens, who I think the obvious objective here is to make Lamar Jackson's job as easy as possible and to make a Super Bowl push, something they weren't able to do under John Harbaugh for many years. I think in order to do that, we need to add to this offense. Give him a number 1 wide receiver, though that many would say Zay Flowers is underrated and he could be a number 1. With the loss of Isaiah Likely, I think it even more so points the emphasis on we need to get a number 1 wide receiver. Jordan Tyson, I think you disregard the health concerns to a degree, right? They're going to do their testing. They're going to have their doctors look at Jordan Tyson. But as far as an athletic freak, as far as a guy that can really transform an offense and be a Pro Bowler from day number 1, have a Jamar Chase level impact, Jordan Tyson can be that. If he is healthy, Lamar, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, this offense can hum at a pretty high level next season. Now, they need to get a lot of offensive line help as well as some defensive pieces. But I think Jesse Minter, which we saw last year with the Chargers, he can elevate a defense. So if you can get this offense to be one of the top-end offenses in the league and Jesse Minter can do his part, the Ravens could actually finally get over the hump. At 15 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This one is boring, but they're desperate. When you have a guy like Todd Bowles who is coaching for his job, they need edge rusher. I think getting a day 1 ready-made edge rusher in Akeem Mesidor, a guy that was a 5-6 year player at the collegiate level, but he was dominant for many of those years, makes too much sense. He can come into this division, get after the young quarterbacks. They're like Bryce Young, like Tyler Shuck, like Tua or Michael Penix, for example. He just makes too much sense for a team that needs a ready plug-and-play player today. At 16, we have the New York Jets, who previously took Arvell Reese at number 2, so that helps the defense. But let's help out this offense. We don't know exactly who the day one starting quarterback is going to be. It could be Geno, it could be Carson Wentz. Regardless of who it is, I think we need to get them another wide receiver. Personally, I will give them Mekhi Lemon. He's a dog. He likes to run block. He is Aaron Glenn's new version of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And of course, he is going to be the second best wide receiver next to Garrett Wilson. So all of a sudden, this offense has some pieces for whichever quarterback will be of the future in 2027. At 17, we have the Detroit Lions. Look, they need offensive line help. They want to get back to running the football. They lost David Montgomery this offseason, which is heartbreaking. I love David Montgomery. But the easy draft pick here is Vega Ione, a true mauler in the run game. Their huge monster frame from Penn State. If you haven't really seen him, just a picture of him, look it up. He fits a Dan Campbell offensive lineman. And there seems to be a lot of bad mojo around the Lions organization with a lot of the offensive linemen leaving, potentially retiring, a lot of players wanting out of that Lions organization. Regardless, get a guy that can set the tone up front next to Penei Sewell. I can trust you. Nobody wants to line up against this Detroit Lions offensive line. I said offensive line and linemen a lot there. Let's move on. Their division rival, the Minnesota Vikings, are up here, and I think this is a no-brainer pick. This is a pick that can be the captain of your defense for many years. A guy that is much resemblant of Harrison Smith, a guy that was a 3-year starter, had 100 or more tackles a year, basically, with a total of 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 8 interceptions. He had a 4.3 40-yard dash as well. Athletic freak. Dylan Thiedemann, a guy that is a top 15 player on my overall big board. You get him at a bit of a value here at 18. Makes too much sense. Vikings get the captain of the back end. At 19, we have the Carolina Panthers. Now, you can go a lot of different ways with this one, but I do think they need interior defensive line. Guys that could set the tone up front in a division that has a lot of talented running backs and they want to run the football. You need a counter for that. I think Peter Woods, though he has been extremely frustrating this offseason with how he didn't really go to the combine or perform in the drills at all, he's coming off already a bit of a down year there for Clemson, but I know what I saw on tape from 2 years ago and from the beginning of this past year. He's an incredible run anchor, pass game disruptor. He's an athletic freak, a bit shorter, but I think he brings everything for the interior defensive line position, and in my eyes, he potentially could be a top 5 player on my overall big board in this year's class. So Carolina gets a steal at 19. And that brings up for the second time the Dallas Cowboys. Have I mentioned I've loved their offseason to this point? They have already drafted Jermon McCoy to handle the outside. I think they do need some linebacker help as well. And I think the obvious pick here is C.J. Allen, a guy that the best way to describe him is a violent tone setter. He gets after it. He sets the tone. He puts his guys in the right spots. And I think C.J. Allen and Jermon McCoy, paired with the additions they made last year and in this offseason, a guy like Rashawn Gary as well, this defense should be night and day better. And don't look now, but Dallas might be my pick to win this division next season. At 21 was the hardest pick for me in this entire first round. The Pittsburgh Steelers are up, and with Vega Ione off the board, with all the top receivers off the board, I'm not trading in this mock draft, so that kind of takes that off the table. I think Mike McCarthy, he's going to want to run the football. Make the job as easy as possible on a guy like Aaron Rodgers, especially at this point. And if you're not in the camp of drafting Ty Simpson at this point, I am not. I believe that Will Howard can be developed into being a serviceable, above-average quarterback in this league. And if that is Mike McCarthy's project, let's protect him. So, again, this year it'll be A-Rod. Next year, Will Howard. Emmanuel Pregnon is a violent interior offensive lineman. Fits perfectly in the McCarthy system. And whether if they want to run the ball, whether if they want to pass the ball, he can help in a variety of ways. At 22, we have the LA Chargers. This was also an interesting selection. I think at this point, you have an offense where you're comfortable with the wide receivers. Your defense has taken a bit of a hit, but you've added some depth on both sides of the ball. I think at this point, you just go best player available. And to me, You have the blocking tight ends in Charlie Kolar. You have Rondé Gadsden, who's shown flashes at the end of last year. But to get a Kenyon Sadiq who can really replace Keenan Allen, and let me explain. Kenyon Sadiq is such a freak at the tight end position. He kind of played like a pseudo wide receiver at Oregon for much of last season. So to give this offense another tight end, which we know John Harbaugh or Jim Harbaugh loves, I think gives a great option for Justin Herbert. It gives this offense a lot of flexibility now with Mike McDaniel, who loves his tight ends. This could be his new Jonnu Smith. Again, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Chargers to continue to add to this offense and give this offense and Justin Herbert a little bit more of a punch going into this next season where they got to put up some more points in those big-time playoff games. At 23, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who would have loved to draft a guy like Kenyon Sadiq, but they brought back Dallas Goedert. So as of right now, I think you look at your offensive line, you have guys like Landon Dickerson, who was contemplating retirement. Lane Johnson is getting up there. This might be his last year as well. You got to add an offensive lineman. To me, they seem to be linked towards Blake Miller, an all ACC tackle who can be the heir apparent to one of those guys I just mentioned. He makes a lot of sense. They're out of Clemson, going to an offense that has a similar scheme. At 24, we have the Cleveland Browns, who recently drafted Monroe Freeling there to be the left tackle of the future. At 24, I do think we need a weapon, right? Like I mentioned, I would have swapped this. I would have gotten a receiver at 6, drafted a tackle here at 24. Maybe that is like a Caden Proctor. That could be, to me, the better option. However, we need a receiver here at 24. Todd Monken needs someone to scheme around. And call me crazy. I'm going to have the Browns drafting Omar Cooper Jr. here out of Indiana at pick 24. He gives me that Jarvis Landry vibe. A guy that is just he brings that energy to an offense, right? He brings that fight, that dog to an offensive locker room, and he brings some life to this wide receiver room that has really been depleted for some time now, outside of maybe having Amari Cooper for a couple of years. So Omar Cooper next to Jerry Jeudy, who he can learn from in the route running department. I think that he brings that energy that Todd Monken loves. And again, Shedeur Sanders would love him as well. So for Shedeur, you get a number 1 wide receiver and a left tackle for the future. Let's go out there and prove if you are the guy of the future. At 25, we have the Chicago Bears, who I am really high on going into next season. I think they have a fairly complete roster, and this is kind of just adding, maybe just adding to the depth of this team. I think you go to the interior of this defensive line, they could use another body, and maybe I'm a biased Gators fan, but Caleb Banks could go in the top 10 of this draft. So to get him at 25, it's a division that loves to run the football with Jahmyr Gibbs, with Aaron Jones and company. Of course, you have Josh Jacobs. To get a Caleb Banks that can kind of stop those guys, it makes too much sense for Ben Johnson to get a tone setter in the middle of that Chicago Bears defense. At 26, we have the Buffalo Bills. A couple days ago, of course, they made a trade with the Chicago Bears, getting DJ Moore officially the number 1 guy for Josh Allen going into next season. Now, you can make the argument that the Bills, with Joe Brady at the helm calling the shots, he could be the guy that just wants to add more offense for Josh Allen to really have the best year of his career and be as easy as possible, right? However, I think when you look at this defense, they can still use some pieces on that defensive front. We saw with the Patriots, we saw with the Jags, with the Seahawks. Having that dominant defensive front can push you a lot farther than you would think as far as preseason expectations. So I think that you're going to go after a dominant edge run defender. To me, that is Keldrick Folk. Potentially the best edge run defender in the class. He could play inside and out, so he brings versatility in that regard. But to get him at 26, and he's maybe the best at one category in this class, it's an absolute steal for Joe Brady. So if you're Joe Brady, you've already addressed the concerns as far as the options and the weapons for Josh Allen, and you can still add to that later on. But you're also now addressing that defensive front. So for Josh Allen, you got to be happy so far in the Joe Brady era. At 27, the San Francisco 49ers are up. they need an offensive tackle, as this is going to be surely the last year of Trent Williams. I think the obvious pick is Caden Proctor. Well, if you want to have him sit and mold him for a year, or whether if you want to have him play right tackle, and then after Trent Williams hangs it up, move him over to left tackle. There's a lot of ways and a lot of different routes you can take with Caden Proctor, but a huge monster frame could definitely be the blind side of the future. At 28, we have the Houston Texans, who could go a lot of different ways. But I'll keep this simple. I think just at this point, getting best player available for a defensive-minded head coach to complete the interior of this defensive line, I think a guy like Lee Hunter is too good to pass up on. So might be a controversial take there, but I think they need more depth up front on that defensive line, and Lee Hunter is an athletic freak there out of Texas Tech. At 29, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, early on, they drafted the cornerback of the future in Mansour Delane. You can continue to go back to that well. You can get Avion Terrell, and all of a sudden, you have two technically sound, really clean prospects that can start and produce at a high level under this Spags defense. However, I think you do need an edge rusher, and that brings you the conversation of a Malachi Lawrence, a Zion Young, TJ Parker. Personally, I've seen them linked to Gabe Akis, and I don't need any more excuses to get this dude in the first round. Gabe Akis is a top 4 edge rusher for me in this year's class. Super explosive, freak of an athlete, and he just produces at such a high level. And you see that so many times last year for the Fighting Illini. I think for Spags, you now have a deep defensive front. You now get the cornerback one of the future. Let's get that defense back to where they were when they won their last Super Bowl. At 30, this is the first time I've seen them here. You have a couple different ways you can go, but for the Miami Dolphins, you, of course, earlier in the draft, picked up Francis Mauigoa, the tackle of the future. And hey, I was contemplating drafting you a corner back there at pick, what was it, 11? You could still get one of the most technically sound corners in the last couple of draft cycles in Avion Terrell at pick 30. So if you are the Miami Dolphins, you're not really giving Malik Willis a lot of help, but getting the tackle of the future, the cornerback one of the future, makes a lot of sense to me to be plug and play guys from day number one for, again, a guy that's coming over as a former defensive coordinator to get a cornerback one. I'm sure he's stoked about that. At pick 31, we have the New England Patriots. They could go with a couple different options. And again, I keep saying that like I'm like a broken record. Of course, there's a lot of options for these teams, right? But for the Patriots, I think it comes down to front seven. Do you want to go edge rusher? Do you want to go linebacker? I think with Jacob Rodriguez on the board at this point for defense that wants to stop the run and make that a focal point under Mike Vrabel, I think Jacob Rodriguez makes too much sense at this point in the draft. Again, he's going to be the play caller, the centerpiece of this defense. I really think he has a Hall of Fame level ceiling to him. Obviously, that's a crazy take because he hasn't played a snap at the NFL level. But Jacob Rodriguez is a top 5 player in my big board. And for you to get him at 31 for a team that was just in the Super Bowl makes too much sense. At 32, we have the Seattle Seahawks. They've lost a lot, especially in that secondary. You lost Tariq Woolen, you lost Kobe Bryant. There's some other players as well. But I think that comes down to which player do you have higher ranked. Do you have guys like a Brandon Cisse, Colton Hood, ranked super high on your big board? Or do you lean more towards like an Emmanuel McNeil Warren, a guy that can play on the back end and flies around the field and makes a bunch of plays? Personally, I was looking around Seattle beat writers and who they're kind of linked to and who the front office likes. I am seeing a lot of Brandon Cisse and I'm seeing a lot of Colton Hood. To get a guy that is ready to go from day number one in Colton Hood, I think makes a bit more sense in drafting the raw potential of a Brandon Cisse. So Colton Hood will be the selection here for the Seattle Seahawks, and that will wrap up the first round of my mock draft 2.0. Now, of course, I'm sure you don't agree with a lot of my predictions. Again, I'm putting myself in the shoes of these teams' GMs. What do I think they're going to do? And then that, of course, is what you just saw. Look, hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys do, help us get to that next big milestone. I can't thank you guys enough for over 100 subscribers to this point, but let's get to 250 before the NFL draft. I know it's a long shot, but hey, what is life if you're not shooting for the stars? But again, I thank you guys deeply, and hopefully you guys enjoyed.